And they asked me the question, what should I do differently when I'm setting up my mountain bike versus my road bike? Now, there's a couple of key points. Let's say we're talking specifically if you're actually using your mountain bike for mountain bike riding. So you maybe going to the local trails and you're going up and down fire trails and dropping it off some deep drops and that kind of stuff. And you've got a reasonably serious bike with, it could be a hardtail, it could be a dually. If it's got a bit of travel and it's not just something that you cruise down to the shops with, but you're actually using it for mountain bike riding. There's a couple of key differences. I tend to not set the back end of the bike up terribly differently to a road bike. So assuming that they're using the same saddle and crank length and so forth, the seat height and the seat setback will not be massively different to the road bike, right? They might vary a little bit based upon these key things. The front end is, of course, totally different. Yep. Flat bar 99% of the time. You do get the odd weirdos with the Jones bars and stuff like that, but we won't talk about them. So if you've got a flat bar versus a road bike, there's huge differences with the contact point at the front, but we'll talk about the back end first. On a road bike, one of our primary goals with the position is steady state efficiency, right? And so your bum is parked in one point and you're doing the same exact pedaling action for thousands and thousands of cycles when you're seated, right? The position doesn't vary a lot. And in mountain biking, it varies all the time. Oh. You go over some little drop off or you go around a corner and you tip the bike, you get out of the saddle, you do 3 hard pedal strokes. The position is infinitely more variable on a mountain bike because of weight shift and traction and all this kind of stuff. So in some senses, the position of the saddle is less critical. If you're off by a couple of millimeters, it doesn't matter as much on a mountain bike because you're constantly moving around anyway. It's very rare that 2 or 3 pedal strokes are exactly the same on a mountain bike because of the movement that occurs. So we want the general position of the seat to be fairly similar, but on a road bike, one of our goals is to remove weight from your front end, right? To have a light balance to the front end. On a mountain bike, that's not so good because if you're that light on your hands, often that means that you're not loading the front tire. And that means that when you go around a corner on some loose packed gravel and there's not enough traction on the front tire because of a lack of weight on the front tire, the bike can handle skittishly. It can wash out the front wheel and you'll go down on your side. So having a good balance distribution of your center of gravity to load the front tire and the rear tire evenly or in such a way that you feel like you have a good distribution of traction between the two is one of the most important things. This is incredibly hard to do on a trainer in a clinic.
Yep.
Because it's a static thing, you're not going up and down, you can't see the rider. Even just measuring how much weight they got on the front and rear tire when they shift their weight around, it's really hard to do. So what I do with my riders is I'll set them up so that they look very similar in the back end to their road bike position. Their pedal stroke is well controlled, it's smooth, it's stable. They don't look overtly heavy on the front or super light by being too far back. And then I get them to go and ride on the trails that they regularly ride. And I say to them, I want you to take notice of how the balance distribution is. So when you get out of the saddle and you shift your weight forward to load the front tire to go around a corner, can you do that easily or do you feel like you've got too far to go to make that happen? If you're seated and you go around a corner and the back end is really planted but the front end is really skatey, you might want to move the seat a little bit forward just to load the front tire slightly and accept that there's going to be downsides to this as well. Like if you move the seat a bit forward to load the front tire, when you start going over like a steep drop off, your weight might be too far forward and you might find it difficult to shift back far enough so that you don't go over the front. So you ask the rider to ride their trails and adjust the seat setback accordingly, yeah? And usually you get them pretty close and they go, well, I tried what you said and I just moved the seat forward about 4 millimeters because I feel like I was a bit skittish on the front tire because my local trails are really loose gravel, right? And that's fine. Mountain biking is a lot about conservation of momentum through corners and over obstacles and stuff, right?
So the position can almost be dictated by the terrain you ride on.
Yeah, so if you got a lot of gnarly drop-offs and steep pinches and stuff, and you might want to ride with the seat further forward or further back based upon what makes you the most confident, the least likely to crash, and the fastest. What helps you to conserve momentum through the corners the best, so that you don't have to slow right down because your front end's not planted enough, that sort of thing. So the seat setback specifically, which alters your center of gravity on the bike, is much less about pedaling efficiency and more about balance on the bike. Yeah. So that's my number one. Feel free to alter the seat setback a little bit to alter the level of traction on the front and the rear tire. Similarly, if you find yourself going up steep inclines and the front end keeps lifting off, move the seat forward a bit. Yeah, because that means you've got too much weight over the back of the bike just to make that happen. Yeah. So altering the seat setback to shift your weight around, very important on a mountain bike, not so important on a road bike, because there's very few circumstances where that will outweigh pedaling efficiency and lack of weight on the hands on a road bike. Whereas on a mountain bike, there's lots of situations where it outweighs that. So your weight distribution to the front of the bike depends on the traction and depends upon the trail type and all this sort of stuff, and the geometry of the bike that you're on. So if you have a 29er versus a hardtail, like a Julie versus a hardtail or something like that, you may find that you prefer different seat setbacks due to the fork sag and how soft it is and what terrain you're using it on and all this kind of stuff. So seat setback in particular shifts your center of gravity around. That's probably the single largest differentiation between the road bike versus the mountain bike is don't take my recommendation of seat setback as gospel. Whereas on a road bike, I can be super accurate with it, but on a mountain bike, depends on the trail that you're on and all these other things. The other one is the front end, of course. Now the front end is really, really different on a mountain bike. Obviously, you've got generally a much slacker head tube angle with a very short stem a lot of the time and a wider bar that's flat. So the front end, it's very rare that the rider is on the limit of their acceptable reach. So if you've got them on a road bike and you have a stem that's 10 mil too long, they will know about it because they'll stretch out and they go, it hurts a bit, it doesn't feel as good as when it's back there. On a mountain bike, for an average rider, you could alter the stem length by 40 millimeters and they just go, it just feels, it handles differently, but I'm not on my limit. I'm not like way stretched out. It takes a lot to really overly stretch a person because the position is much more upright. There's very rarely a lot of drop to the bars on a mountain bike. And so you're well within your limit of torso drop and therefore reach a lot of the time. Not always, but like 95% of the time. You can alter the person's stem length and all they do is they go from there to there to there, and that doesn't change their body position heavily like it does on a road bike. So the choice of height of the bar and length of the bar away from you, again, comes down more to steering stability. And does the person prefer narrow bars with a longer stem so that they can get through tight single track with overhanging branches without catching a bar and crashing? Do they have something like a Mondraker with a massively slack head tube angle and a super short, like a 30 mil stem or a 45 mil stem with a super slack head tube and a really wide set of bars because they like the way that steers? It comes down to, again, steering sensitivity and traction to the front end more so than sensitivity to the weight distribution. Whereas on a road bike, it's super sensitive to weight distribution and it's all about efficiency and keeping the weight off your hands. On a mountain bike, altering this alters the way it steers, which is much more important than the road bike, which is all about the weight on the hands. So you very rarely find that the person is right on their limit of their reach and the drop on the mountain bike. So altering the front end is, again, it's about altering steering sensitivity and traction rather than keeping weight off their hands and making them as comfortable as they can be. Yeah. And so, you've got a lot more leeway on a mountain bike with the front end, whereas on a road bike, you've got a 5 to 10 mil tolerance for most people in terms of the reach and the drop. Once they get outside of that really tight, narrow band, they will perceive, oh, that's a bit stretched out, or that's a bit short, or that's a bit high. They will actually perceive and look different to the bike fitter. Whereas on a mountain bike, you can sometimes you have a person with a 60 mil stem and you stick a 90 mil stem on and they just lean forward slightly more. And you go, which one's better? It's
Yes.
hard to tell. And so a little bit of testing and tuning on the trails with, the longer the stem is, the more predictable the steering gets. The shorter the stem is, the tighter and sharper it gets, and the same thing with the bar width, yeah? So I used to prefer to run a slightly longer stem and I'd cut my bars right down because I had no trouble steering it, and I could tuck through tight single track with overhanging branches and again conserve momentum through the corners better because I could carry more corner speed than other guys because I had more room for my bars. But if you're on big wide open fire trails with lots of ruts and you just want steering stability, go with a wider bar and a longer stem.
Yep.
Yeah, so other considerations other than balance and weight distribution like it is with the road bike, come into it with a mountain bike with the front end as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So the good news is for the mountain bikers is that the position is much less sensitive.
That's good.
Much less sensitive. Yeah. Even the cleat systems that they use, typically the SPD mountain bike cleat system, there's a lot more rock, a lot more slop, a lot more play. The Q factor's a bit wider, so big guys can get away with it more easily. They're a lot less locked in than any of the road systems. So the margin for error, if something is a little bit off, is much bigger. And again, it's even bigger if you use flats. If you've got flat shoes, mate, you can alter the person's seat height by 50 mil and they'll be fine. They'll just move their foot around on the pedal to change their leg length.
Yes.
So being less locked in with the mountain bike cleat systems is good for some people because it gives them a wider tolerance of the position.
Okay, good.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Not to me.
Never been on a mountain bike, have you?
I kind of understood what you were saying. This video's not for me, so thanks, Neil. Appreciate it.
No stress, mate. Cheers.